Comparing the works of Zora Neale Hurston and Toni Morrison by Skylar, Kalina, Daisy, and Vanessa. For our school of criticism, we chose the critical race theory. The critical race theory emerged out of anger after the slow progression of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. The critical race theory focuses on the appearance of race and racism across history. Critical race theory scholars recognize that individuals are racist, but question how socio-cultural aspects shaped racist views. Additionally, critical race theory examines race interactions with identity. Overall, the critical race theory scholars emphasize the importance of equality among individuals. African American literature developed between the 18th and 19th centuries in response to large social movements favoring equality within the United States. The most common themes throughout this literature have progressed throughout our history as the integration of African Americans has become much more favorable and defended by the United States government. African American literature before the American Civil War was originally centered around social injustice such as slavery and inequality. However, it has slowly transitioned to mirror works of the United States authors as a whole. These works are expressed through a variety of forms that typically incorporate evocative language to emphasize historical and cultural allusions for dramatic effects. African American literature is most commonly found in the form of writing, but can be expressed orally too with forms of poetry, rap, and often African American gospel. Toni Morrison intends to expose the subjugation of African Americans during the 20th century by emphasizing individuality in response to lost identity by combining historical events throughout her fictional works and relationships among various characters. These relationships serve as a symbol of larger themes concerning the social and cultural history of the United States pertaining to African American subjugation. This allows her readers to connect and empathize with the struggles her characters endured that mirrored true tragic circumstances like slavery and discrimination. Alternating between realistic and fictional elements of African American culture encouraged the expression of Morrison's political and social commentary. Throughout her literary pieces, Morrison establishes a recurring theme of individuality by forcing Black individuals subject to discrimination to choose between a life lived by the law or in law. A life lived subject to the law restricts individuals through society's labels and expectations, often determined by religion, race, and social status, in contrast to a life in law that utilizes the legal system to their advantage in order to fight for their freedom. Because African Americans are the group these themes are most targeted for, the stories are manipulated in order to establish a connection between Morrison and her readers. The critical race theory allows for Morrison to incorporate the values she proposes throughout her literary pieces into a society in which its white citizens cater their morals to what is generally accepted, rather than what is fair. By endorsing African American liberation, Morrison uses literature as an avenue for social reform. Her pieces also provide countless examples of the consequences of being constrained by society's perception of different races and gender. These examples and extreme situations reveal her character's true character and are used to suggest the importance of individuality and embracing heritage. By reflecting on the past, Morrison allows her readers to visualize the destructive tendencies of the United States. Hurston's writing style can be exemplified in Their Eyes Were Watching God by her alternation between lofty and down-to-earth tones. There are two distinct voices and tones throughout the narration of this story. The quote written on our slide from Chapter 1 demonstrates these two voices perfectly. When Janie begins to speak in the second sentence, her pronunciation of each word is emphasized because Hurston focuses on Janie's thoughts rather than any assumption as to how she may or may not be perceived by each reader in order to provide some clarity for her readers. This is an important element that is a recurring theme throughout Hurston's works because by staying true to Janie's speech, she is incorporating her character's heritage as part of her identity. This pattern can be confirmed by the other narrator that suggests an individual, particularly directed at African Americans during this time period, is much more than what lies on the surface of their appearance and words. This is a very important concept because during this time period, African Americans were seen as property rather than an individual. The narrator in this story presents African Americans as a minority that internalize and respond according to racial slurs and remarks. The black communities within this story are disintegrated by racism based on skin color. The characters often act on their jealousy of the superior race because of this injustice and desire to decimate those more successful. Hurston incorporates these examples of inhumane treatment in order to demonstrate the severity and consequences of inequality. More importantly, however, the narrator takes a more wholesome and impartial look at African American society during this time period by emphasizing the best qualities that are the foundation of their culture. The African American literary works of Morrison are in many ways very similar to those of Hurston. Both of these authors write primarily to African Americans to provide hope and some incentives to embrace their heritage rather than perceiving it as a constraint. Additionally, both authors create pieces that serve as an avenue for social reform and were written in response to social and cultural injustice. Although both Their Eyes Are Watching God and Beloved are centered around inequality in relationships, their effects on African American culture vary slightly because Their Eyes Were Watching God puts more emphasis on gender roles and suggests women can only elevate her social status if she marries a successful man. In contrast, Beloved focuses more on the importance of community. Although both of these are a reflection of the mistreatment of African Americans during this time period, the differences between each author's focus suggests that the circumstances vary between each individual of this time period.